This story took place about 11 years ago, during my senior year of high school. To this day, it remains the most unsettling and inexplicable event I have ever experienced. For context, it occurred in mid-December, during the frigid Iowa winter. If you are unfamiliar with winters in this region, they are brutal. Nighttime temperatures are life-threateningly cold, and the snow muffles everything, creating an eerie silence. Inside the house, every sound is amplified, and the stillness outside is palpable. That evening, my best friend Colton and I were spending a quiet night in my family's walkout basement. My mother was not home. She had gone to a bar with coworkers directly after work, so we had the house to ourselves. Given the circumstances, we decided to sneak into the family wine collection to add some excitement to an otherwise uneventful night. As we opened the first bottle, the sound of the garage door opening and slamming shut startled us. My immediate thought was, "Oh no," and I began frantically looking for a place to hide the wine bottle. Colton turned to me, confused, and said, "I thought you said your mom wasn't coming home tonight." "She's not supposed to be," I replied, equally confused. Then I heard a series of heavy footsteps, followed by my mother's voice calling out, "Meow Sanboo, anyone home?" This was her affectionate nickname for me. I yelled back, "Yes, just hanging out in the basement." The footsteps continued toward the stairs, and she called again, "Can you come help me with something? I need you up here." As I was still trying to conceal the wine bottle, I replied, "Sure, just give me a minute." And then there was silence. For about 20 seconds, nothing moved. Then her voice came again, this time with a more serious tone. "Is anyone down there with you?" Something about her voice in that moment felt off. It sounded like my mother, but there was a subtle wrongness to it, something I couldn't quite place. It didn't help that our family never cared about who was visiting. Our home had always been an open and welcoming place. Feeling uneasy, I replied, "Just Colton." Finally satisfied with where I had stashed the bottle, I started up the stairs to see what she needed. Yet, as I climbed, I was overcome by an oppressive silence in the house. The air felt heavy, almost charged with something unnatural. When I reached the top of the stairs, I saw that the kitchen and the area near the garage door were completely dark. No lights were on, and no moonlight filtered in through the windows. The house was pitch black. I called out, "Mom, where are you?" But there was no response, just silence. At this point, that strange feeling of unease turned into full-blown dread. My heart raced, and adrenaline surged through me. I suddenly realized my mother wasn't home. I bolted back down the stairs, grabbing my coat as I went. "What's wrong?" Colton asked, seeing the panic on my face. "My mom's not home," I said, frantically searching for my truck keys. "What do you mean? You were just talking to her," he said, looking completely bewildered. "There's no one home. We need to leave. Now." But as I moved toward the door leading to the backyard, I noticed my dog trembling on the couch, and my cat growling from behind it. They were terrified, and the sight of them stopped me in my tracks. I couldn't just leave them there. Colton, still trying to process what was happening, asked, "So, are we going or not?" "No, I can't leave them here alone," I said, my voice shaking. "Something's really wrong. I'm calling my mom." I pulled out my phone and dialed her number. She answered almost immediately. "Meow Sanboo? What's going on?" "Mom," I said, my words tumbling out in a panic. "Were you just home?" I heard you calling me from upstairs, but when I went up, you weren't there." Her response made my blood run cold. "No, I'm still at the bar. I wasn't feeling well, so I'm leaving now. Are you okay?" "What do you mean, you heard me?" I quickly explained everything, and she told me she was on her way home. Colton and I stayed in the basement with the animals until she arrived, but before she got there, we heard something upstairs. It wasn't footsteps or the sound of anything moving exactly. It was more like a heavy, oppressive presence, a pressure in the air, shifting from one room to the next. The only word that comes to mind to describe it is hungry. When my mom finally returned, the presence vanished as suddenly as it had appeared. The house felt lighter, as though whatever had been there was gone. To this day, we have no explanation for what happened. It's just one of many strange events that have occurred in that house. But this one stands out because I wasn't alone. Colton experienced it with me. Now, years later, my mother has passed away, and I've moved to Arizona. But every time I visit Iowa and see Colton, he still brings it up. He still shudders at the memory, as do I. Whatever it was that mimicked my mother's voice that night, it was not human. It was something else. Something dark. Something hungry. This happened about 13 years ago when I was a sophomore in college. I was attending a small liberal arts school in Suffolk County, New York. And by the end of my first couple of months as a freshman, I'd found my crew. We were a tight-knit group of theater geeks, 6 guys, including me, and 1 girl. We all loved horror movies, ghost stories, and just about anything creepy, so we were perfectly matched for the weird and the dramatic. Freshman year was rough, but having that group made everything easier and way more fun. Fast forward to sophomore year. October rolls around, Halloween vibes are in full swing, and we decide we're going to do something epic to celebrate. The plan? Find a spooky, isolated spot nearby, head out late at night, and scare ourselves senseless. After some internet sleuthing, we came across this area about 30 minutes away that was supposedly infamous for paranormal sightings. It sounded perfect. We split into 2 cars and set off into the night. The drive started off normal enough. Strip malls, fast food places, bright lights. But the second we turned off the main road, it was like a switch flipped. The area was pitch dark, thick with trees on either side, and the roads twisted and turned into an endless web. There were barely any streetlights or houses, and the deeper we went, the more it felt like we were leaving civilization behind. We had no real plan, other than to keep driving until we found a good spot to explore. Phones were fully charged, flashlights ready. We thought we were prepared for anything. Eventually, we came across a huge fallen log blocking the road, and that was our signal. This was as good a place as any to park and check things out. Past the log were 2 narrow trails leading in opposite directions, so we flipped a coin and picked the trail to the right. It was so narrow we had to walk single file to avoid the branches. Somehow, I ended up in the back, and that's when I started feeling off. I can't explain it fully, but I just had this creeping sense that we were being watched. I kept hearing faint noises coming from deep in the woods, like twigs snapping or leaves rustling. It wasn't loud enough for anyone else to notice, and I didn't want to sound paranoid, so I brushed it off. After all, we'd come out here to get scared, right? Besides, there were 7 of us, all able-bodied college students. What could possibly go wrong? We followed the trail for what felt like forever, about 20 minutes, when it suddenly opened up into a massive clearing. I mean, huge. The field stretched out like an overgrown golf course, surrounded by dense trees on every side. We couldn't even see where it ended. We were relieved to be out of the narrow trail, but none of us expected to find a space so vast in the middle of nowhere. Then someone spotted something. An old, boarded-up house on the far edge of the clearing. It was dark, with no signs of life. But of course, we had to check it out. We walked over, shining our flashlights at the windows and doors, but it was completely sealed up. Peeking through one of the gaps in the boards, I could see an old white couch covered in plastic in an otherwise empty room. Whoever had lived there was long gone. Since there was no way inside, we decided to head back toward the trail, plop down in the field, and figure out our next move. But just as we were about to sit, my friend Mark froze. His face dropped, and he pointed to the far side of the clearing. We all turned to look. There, on the edge of the field, was someone, tall, lanky, and pale, moving among the trees. They weren't walking, though. They were dancing, skipping, spinning, grabbing onto trees and swinging around them like they were part of some bizarre performance. It was so surreal that at first, it didn't even register. The moonlight was bright, and it took a second for us to fully process what we were seeing. Our friend Jay, who's 6'4", and the eternal skeptic of the group, squinted at the figure and muttered, "What are you all looking at?" I pointed it out to him and said, "Right there. You don't see that?" The second he did, he gasped and clutched my arm. "What the hell is that?" And that's when it stopped dancing. It turned to face us, paused for just a moment, and then started sprinting straight toward us. We didn't wait to find out what it wanted. We bolted. I didn't even think. My legs just moved. Jay, who still hadn't fully processed what was happening, yelled after us, "What's going on? Where are you going?" But then I heard him scream, "Holy shit!" and saw his flashlight bouncing as he finally ran to catch up. What had taken us 20 minutes to walk now took closer to 5 to sprint. We made it back to the cars, jumped in, and tore out of there as fast as we could. We didn't stop until we were miles away. When we finally pulled over, we just sat there, trying to catch our breath and make sense of what had happened. My heart felt like it was going to explode. Nearly 15 years later, we're all still friends. Life has taken us to different places, but we still talk. And every now and then, one of us will bring it up in our group chat. The woods, that was real, right? And every time, we all confirm that yes, it absolutely was. Here's the part that sticks with me the most. Whoever or whatever that was, they were dancing alone in the woods in the dead of night. And when they saw us, a group of 7 people, they didn't hesitate to charge straight at us. It was like they weren't afraid of us at all. Had they been watching us from the moment we arrived? Were they the source of the noises I kept hearing on the trail? I'll never know. But one thing's for sure. None of us wanted to stick around to find out. In 2003, I met a guy who promised me adventure. He was charming and spontaneous, the opposite of my small-town upbringing. At the time, I had never traveled outside my state, let alone experienced much of life beyond the bubble of my quiet hometown. He told me he'd show me the world, and I, in my youthful naivety, believed him. What I didn't know was how much my safe little world was about to shatter. He was a truck driver, and soon after we started dating, he suggested I join him on the road. It sounded exciting, a chance to see the country and escape the monotony of my life. And at first, it was. I traveled across the U.S., saw incredible landscapes and experienced places I'd only dreamed of. But life on the road was grueling. Imagine being stuck in a tiny cab with someone 24/7, with no personal space and minimal entertainment. Back then, we didn't have smartphones or streaming services. Our only distractions were a few DVDs, books, or conversations on the CB radio. The CB was our version of social media, a way to connect with other truckers. Everyone had a handle, a nickname to maintain anonymity. My ex went by Ninja Dwarf, and I became Northern Exposure because I was young and from Alaska. But not everyone on the CB was friendly. Some truckers were downright creepy, and one of them would eventually become a figure I'll never forget. One night, as we were driving through the middle of nowhere, the CB crackled to life. A faint voice broke through the static, growing louder as the truck got closer. Then I heard it clearly, and my blood ran cold. The voice was strange, off somehow. The closest comparison I can make is Heath Ledger's Joker, unsettling, with an edge of malice. "Hey there, Purple Pete, where you headed?" the voice asked, referencing the color of our truck. My ex answered casually, saying we were heading to Arkansas. "Mind if I tag along?" the man asked. He introduced himself as Maniac and described his truck, a black Peterbilt with a cattle guard and a brow. Over the weeks that followed, Maniac seemed to pop up everywhere we went. He claimed to run routes from California to Florida, which explained why we kept crossing paths. My ex started chatting with him regularly, but I couldn't shake the uneasy feeling his voice gave me. Then one week, Maniac suggested we meet in Nevada. My ex was excited about the idea, but I wasn't. Still, we agreed to meet at a truck stop, only for Maniac to stand us up. My ex brushed it off, but I felt relieved. Something about him just didn't sit right with me. Months later, we encountered him again, this time in Oklahoma. By then, there was buzz on the CB about a series of brutal murders targeting lot lizards, truck stop sex workers in the southern states. The stories were horrific. Women found mutilated and left in grotesque scenes. Most truckers dismissed it as radio gossip, but when my ex mentioned it to Maniac, his response was chilling. "Must be one sick fuck doing it," Maniac said with a laugh. "Bet he's leaving fingerprints everywhere, just begging to get caught." It was an odd thing to say, but Maniac was odd, so we didn't think much of it. Looking back, I wish I'd trusted my instincts. A few weeks later, we planned another meetup with Maniac, this time in Tennessee. When we arrived at the truck stop, he was nowhere to be found. We waited, ate dinner, and eventually headed back to our truck. As we walked through the lot, I noticed a bobtail truck parked oddly in a full space. It was dark, with a cattle guard and brow, and as we passed, I saw the driver sitting in the passenger seat under a red reading light. He looked at me and smiled. It was a smile I'll never forget. Creepy, distorted, and full of something sinister. He quickly shut the blinds, and chills ran up my spine. I didn't connect it to Maniac at the time, but the uneasy feeling stuck with me. Later that night, the CB chatter revealed the horrifying reason for the police presence at the truck stop. A lot lizard had been brutally murdered. I won't go into graphic details, but she'd been tied to a trailer and ripped apart when the unsuspecting driver pulled out. It was a scene straight out of a horror movie. I couldn't shake the image of her body or the smell of blood in the air. By the time we returned to our truck, the bobtail was gone. Months passed, and life on the road continued. By February 2004, We were in New Orleans. I was excited about the chance to explore the city and see the sights, but that excitement faded when Maniac's voice came over the CB again. "Hey there, Purple Pete! What brings you out this way?" he asked, his voice louder than ever. He was close. My ex, still bitter about the previous no-show, confronted him. "Why'd you stand us up in Tennessee?" Maniac laughed. "Cops make me uneasy. I'd rather not get caught." "Caught for what?" my ex asked, confused. Maniac's response made my blood run cold. "Don't worry about it. Just keep an eye on your girl. I'd hate for something bad to happen to her, like all those other girls." His voice grew darker as he continued, describing how he rid the world of its sins by torturing and killing lot lizards. Then, as if to drive the point home, his black Peterbilt rolled slowly past our truck. He keyed up the mic again, and his voice came through the CB one last time. "Be safe out there, Ninja Dwarf and Northern Exposure." I froze. It was the same truck and the same creepy grin I'd seen in Tennessee. After that encounter, I was done. I stopped making friends on the road and carried a knife with me everywhere we went. Maniac's words and that disgusting smile haunted me for years. By April, my ex and I had returned to Alaska for a family emergency. The trucking life felt like a distant nightmare, but I couldn't stop wondering how many victims Maniac had claimed. 7 murders had been tied to a trucker fitting his description, but who knows how long he'd been operating. I don't know if he was ever caught, but I can tell you one thing. I'm grateful I never met him alone. That voice, that smile, it's something I'll carry with me forever. It was more than creepy. It was pure evil.